Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dwayne and thanks for watching today. So today we're going to be diving deep into really what's it's been like to own the Quad Cortex for 3 years. So it's crazy to think I've had the Quad Cortex for 3 years because when you look at all the updates and stuff that have come out for it, it kind of feels like the device really only launched, 2023. So even though I've had it for 3 years and it's been out for 3 years, I feel like really it technically kind of launched, early 2023. So yeah, and maybe it's coming up more like 2 years really the launch of the Quad Cortex. But yeah, it's hard to believe how fast time's flowing. And there's a lot to unpack here in this video. And hopefully it's informative for you if you're kind of deciding whether or not to buy the Quad Cortex, if you've been on the fence about it, and you kind of want something a little bit more real world that isn't a polished review that kind of just talks about the good stuff and kind of skims over some of the caveats. But anyway, we're going to get onto all that. So anyway, let's hop into why I first brought the Quad Cortex in the first place. I could say it was a nice UI. I could say that it was the capture feature or, the nice polished Apple-esque aesthetic and form factor that made me decide to buy the Quad Cortex. But it was actually Mike Stringer's epic YouTube playthroughs that initially lured me in. So if you don't know who Mike Stringer is, there's a band called Spirit Box, which some of you may know. And he did playthrough videos and stuff for some of his songs. And one day, he uploaded a playthrough for the song Circle With Me from their album. And he uploaded this playthrough and he wasn't playing through a Kemper or anything like that like he'd previously been doing. He's playing through this beautiful little sleek looking device with a touch screen that looked unlike anything else in 2021. And it piqued my curiosity for a few reasons, but the form factor and the beautiful nature of like how it just stood out. It was understated. It wasn't this big, massive, pedal board like some of the other modelers. It wasn't a big, bulky, microwave-looking device. It was this little, beautiful box, but besides how it looked, it just sounded huge. Like in the song, it just sounded absolutely epic. Just listen to how amazing this sounds. I mean, it's just absolutely monstrous sounding, and that sealed the deal for me. When I saw that, I was like, what is this device? Where can I get it? How much is it? And I didn't have a lot of money at the time, but I took the plunge. To say the least, which is why we're having this conversation now. Obviously, part of Mike's tone comes down to, not just the Quad Cortex itself, but his pickups, his playing style, the fact that he's such a good player. But this was the best advertisement for the Quad Cortex at the time, in my opinion. This was before Neural were doing the official Quad Cortex playthroughs with bands like Architects and stuff. But yeah, just seeing that's what sold it for me. And unfortunately, I believe that Mike has since moved on from the Quad Cortex. Well, he has. I think he's gone back to the fractal world. And unfortunately, see these sounds in here, he had these presets and captures of the Amiga Granifier and stuff on the cloud. I did get them and I've got them backed up, fortunately. But he's deleted them all, I noticed recently. So you can't even get some of these monstrous sounding things that he has on there. Hopefully that'll be fixed with the plug-in compatibility models coming in the future, but yeah, huge loss in my opinion. But there's so much more to why this unit has remained such a staple in my arsenal, and I haven't replaced it with anything else. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Beginning with the thing that hooked me right away on the Quad Cortex. So as soon as I unboxed the Quad Cortex and I powered it up, the thing that blew my mind was the user interface. So I'd seen stuff about it beforehand and whatnot, so I kind of knew what I was getting, but to see something and experience it, it's just two different things. And I remember seeing the touch screen for the first time, bright, clear, and intuitive, very responsive. Sometimes with a touchscreen device, it's a bit laggy, doesn't respond well. Like this thing just felt like using a tablet in a box, basically. It was as if Neural DSP had taken a step into the future while everyone was still kind of, fumbling around in the past with like more manual knobs and dials and stuff. Obviously, not the only device to kind of step into that realm with a beautiful screen, but really the first modeler to kind of step into that drag and drop intuitive workflow, that doesn't have you fumbling around to try and use it. If you could use a tablet or a phone, it was the same thing. It's just that intuitive, which kind of made absorbing the fact that it didn't have a desktop controlling software at the time, I guess, easier to swallow and reconcile with, because in my opinion, you didn't really need it. I mean, it was a pain if you're kind of using it in a studio setting and you've got it on the floor and not in your desk, because you want to be able to use the stomps and not use your hands. And if you're not MIDI controlling it, that's another issue, but we obviously have the desktop software now. But yeah, at the time, like, it didn't seem like an issue for most people, myself included, that you had to interact with the device directly, because it was nice. It wasn't painful at all to use it. And I think that there's this profound simplicity to the Quad Cortex. You switch it on and you just immediately empowered to start creating. You don't have to fumble through a user manual, or you don't have to spend ages navigating complex menus. It's essentially plug and play. It's, turn it on and start using it. It's great for guitarists who just want to focus on the music, not the tech. With other modelers I've tried, it's often felt like they were built for engineers rather than musicians. Like the Fractal unit's incredibly powerful, but, when you start getting into the world of like sag and bias and hum and stuff, most people don't give a shit about that stuff. Let's be honest. Most people don't care about kind of affecting the power dynamics and whatnot of the tubes in their models. They just want something that sounds good. They want a high gain amp. They just expect to choose one and dial it in. Just like if you had a real world amp, you would just expect there to be a few knobs on there and just largely just be able to play it. And that's not to say that other modelers are inferior because they offer more power, but for people like me and the majority of guitarists, I would say, we don't actually care about having that deep engineering-led aspect of our amp models. We just want them to sound good, right? That's all we want. And I think that was a huge game changer that Neural didn't they could have easily gone to the, degree where they basically just made it this complicated mess, but they went for simplicity. And I think it worked, and it still works. It resonates with someone like me who, I have kids. I don't have hours to sit around and play with a device and learn all the intricacies like other modelers kind of force you to do. Now, while the Quad Cortex has held its own since launch, I feel like other modelers are catching up. Neural kind of were at the forefront of their incredible amp sims with the plugins, and then going into the hardware world, obviously they continued that. I don't think any other modeler has the nice Apple aesthetic that the Quad Cortex does. Not to say that, the look of other modelers like the Helix or the FM9 from Fractal don't appeal to a certain subset of people. I think, they don't have that nice, I guess they look more industrial, which, probably makes people feel like they're more durable, but I haven't found the Quad Cortex is any less durable than a Helix or a Fractal unit. But in terms of UI, Fender obviously released the Tone Master Pro, which arguably took the crown for the best UI out of all the modelers. And while it's a nice modeler, a nice UI alone isn't everything. It doesn't immediately outdate the Quad Cortex. The Quad Cortex holds its own. It's still up there, in my opinion. And I think worth mentioning with the Tone Master Pro, which I had briefly, is while some of the models were decent, the device just failed to impress me as a whole beyond its UI. Whereas the Quad Cortex may not have the nice, beautiful representations of the amps and stuff like that. You know, it doesn't look like desktop software running on a device. I think the Quad Cortex just excels overall in multiple areas, you know, where the UI is still no slouch. It's still beautiful. It's still cutting edge, in my opinion. Still better than the majority of other modelers, in my opinion. But just the quality of the sounds and the effects combined with the UI and the form factor, it's just a win-win, in my opinion. The fact that you can easily throw this in a backpack is just a huge, you know, boon for majority of us who don't want to be lugging around 20 kilo amp modelers, or, you know, paying exorbitant shipping to ship, you know, amp stacks. Unless you've got Metallica money, you know, it's expensive to ship amps and cabinets and stuff, and even rent them. Now let's talk about another thing that kind of impressed me, which I don't really see people talking about that often, is the factory presets that come on the Quad Cortex. If you're getting into this device for the first time, and maybe, even though it's simplistic, you're feeling intimidated, maybe you're not an experienced guitarist, you're not really familiar with a lot of the equipment, you would go for the factory presets. And even though I've been playing guitar for a few years, normally the minute I've ever got a new modeler, I've been keen to kind of dive into the factory presets and feel pretty compelled to, you know, not use them or tweak them, because let's be honest, they usually aren't the greatest. You know, you have a few gems, but for the most part, they're corny sounding, not really useful. You wouldn't use a factory preset to play live in a lot of instances. But with the Quad Cortex, I think the thing that stood out to me, and still stands out to me, because sometimes I still go into the factory presets, is some of the actual factory presets, I'd say a large majority of them are really good. And I think they clearly put a lot of serious thought into the stock presets that come with this. You know, they're not just fillers. There's some legitimately good starting points that don't sound corny or over engineered. And I've even found using some of them in live settings straight out of the gate, which is rare, because how many people can say I'm using a factory preset from an amp model or something you didn't create yourself to play live? But if you scroll through the Quad Cortex, you'll actually see that there's some really good clean presets on there. It shows you how to do things like multiple amps using the splitter, basically how to use a lot of the devices by example, as opposed to diving in to the actual manual itself. You know, like this clean, for example. That is the Intimate Clean preset that comes with the Quad Cortex. And I'll just kind of would love to briefly kind of go over some of these presets on here, just to kind of show you that there's some great factory presets on here. Like this baritone ambience. Let's see what Major Strat Vibes is. Oh, that sounds beautiful. I am in drop C on this tuning as well, so you know, some of these things aren't going to sound like standard tuning riffs, but you can see there's some amazing, like this crunchy 2203, which is obviously a JCM 800. It just, I know, I haven't used this, but I know it's going to sound mean just playing it. There's let's see what else we got on here. Got a couple I've made in here as well, I think. Oh, no, sorry. This is, these are factory presets. Carnival, I'm guessing, is Voolish. Clear lead. See what I mean? The factory presets, there's some awesome stuff on here. That's definitely a lead preset. What's modern power? Is that like metal? Oh, that sounds so mean. Titan Metal X. What is this one? Oh yeah, that's tight. Listen to that. It's obviously gated. It's Brothers in Arms. But see what I mean? Like, these are factory presets on here, and obviously there's not going to be all like really good ones in here. Like, I'm in bank 15 at the moment of the factory presets, but you can see there's 32 banks of factory presets on here, and while they may not all be good, there's some great stuff in here. I won't kind of make this video all about, obviously, the Forbidden Riff. Is that Smoke on the Water? Oh, it is. Do you know what I mean? How fun is this? Like, obviously, Message in a Bottle by The Police. Let's see. I'm in drop C tuning there. Don't know how to play it in drop C, but you can hear that is definitely the Message in a Bottle tone. Really hard riff to play, by the way, because your fingers are like, they have to be really spread out. It's like jumping one fret across, like so. Anyway, I didn't want this to kind of just be about the presets, but I just wanted to show you that even if you've owned the Quad Cortex for a while, you've probably looked over these factory presets, and there's some awesome factory presets in here. So I definitely highly recommend that you go check them out, because it's going to show you how to use this unit. And if you look at how they're built, it's also going to show you how they're pieced together as well. Anyway, so ease of use and the quality of the factory presets aside, one of my other favorite parts of the Quad Cortex is how versatile it is. So when you're dialing in tones, I mean. So you can go from clean, glassy tones that shimmer to high gain, face melting distortion pretty damn easily. Drag it in or use the desktop controller to do it. It's incredibly user-friendly compared to, say, navigating a Kemper or a fractal unit, where sometimes you spend more time scrolling and tweaking than actually playing. I find it just kind of sucks the fun out of it a little bit, at least for me. Like, I'm a developer, I've got an engineering mindset, but even for me, like, if I feel like I'm just sitting there and kind of having to really put thought into things to get it to sound good and sculpt it, as opposed to having my hands held a little bit, I guess I'm a little bit of a baby in that regard. I'll always take the ease of use, even if I am missing out on some of the maybe deeper customization options. Like I said, I don't care about that stuff. Majority of you watching probably don't care either. We're not audio engineers. We probably don't really care about the power dynamics of what's powering the tubes. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because if it sounds good, it sounds good, right? I feel like the Quad Cortex just feels like an extension of your creative process rather than an obstacle. The factory presets, like I said, you can get in there, you can play live with this stuff. There's enough factory presets in there where you could go, and you're in a covers band, find some solid factory presets and then use those. And while we're talking about the creativity, let's not forget how easy it is to experiment. If you're anything like me, you love to mix things up, trying wild signal chains or doubling down on bizarre effects, like putting delays and reverbs in unconventional spots, doubling up amps and cabs, practicing and experimenting around with using the splitter in unique ways and splitting stuff between rows. With the Quad Cortex, even though that kind of gets you into the realm of a more complicated workflow, there's just no hassle. It's just no complicated setup. Just boundless possibility. So you're free to let your imagination roam, which is what making music should be about, right? Like, obviously in the real world, if you're using real equipment, you're limited by what you have in front of you. But you've got a digital amp modeler with potentially tens of thousands of different combinations and sounds. So, just experiment and have fun, right? Like, it's a device that's not going to limit you. So why limit yourself when you don't have to? It takes me back to my Line 6 days, especially where I'd run into DSP issues trying to create ambitious presets. I don't know if the Helix has those issues per se, because the Helix is pretty powerful in itself, and despite its age, it's held its own, and Line 6 have updated that, so credit to them. It's a well-polished device. But I've yet to run into any power limitations on the Quad Cortex. Not to say that you couldn't if you're working on an ambitious, over-the-top shoegaze preset with 20 reverbs and delays, but for most players, the DSP limit on this thing is a ceiling you will never reach. I'd say the majority of people will never hit a limit on this. Now, it wouldn't be fair not to discuss the ups and downs I've encountered with the Quad Cortex over the last 3 years. What's an incredible piece of tech, and I love it. I play with it almost every day I can. There were some significant bumps along the road in the early days, primarily, especially when it comes to software updates. Let's hit on the elephant in the room. If you've owned this device, for more than a couple of years, communication with Neural DSP has been a bit turbulent. It's been a bit up and down over the years. The biggest one, I think, was the mistake they made was the promise of plug-in compatibility was such a huge selling point for the Quad Cortex. And it took them nearly 3 years to make it a reality. And we've only got 2 plugins at the moment. Obviously, the Gojira and the Plenty. And maybe you're watching this when there's more. I know there's more coming at the end of November, hopefully. But during this time, like in the early days, the community was getting quite restless, to say the least. The infamous soon meme became a running joke among Quad Cortex users who have eagerly awaited for a lot of the promised features they felt like they were entitled to. And Neural did make a mistake by promising those would come shortly after launch, and you could argue 2-3 years is not shortly after launch. That's a long time. I've aged a bit in that time. It was a period where communication seemed to, it took a bit of a backseat at Neural. I know this was during the pandemic, so they were maybe having issues with the pandemic and whatnot. Understandable. You don't know what some of the people going there were going through at the time. They may have been losing family members. Supply chains were probably stressing them out. They launched this product and then the pandemic comes along. But the community, I guess, in their mind, they think, I bought this device. I wanted these promised features. They're not here. It kind of felt like they were kind of a bit ripped off in a way, even though they weren't, because, obviously the device didn't ship empty. But yeah, for a lot of people, they were upset. The Discord community, which you should join, by the way, if you're not a member already, it felt very tense in those early days. I remember it. It's rare these days, still happens sometimes, but the mods were working overtime to quell the rage and keep things simple and civil. And I felt bad for them because it was pretty hairy at one point. But fortunately, 2024, Neural's turned a corner. Now we get at least a development update blog post a month, which is fantastic. Even if the update is like still working on these things, they're a little bit better at not making promises that they can't deliver on. I think there's still work to do in that regard. But they've finally rolled out plugin compatibility now, which has kind of quelled a lot of the upset people and the people on the fence saying they wouldn't buy it until they got plugin compatibility. And the first two plugins they shipped were Archetype Gojira and Archetype Pliny, which two fantastic presets because Gojira is obviously awesome for your high gain stuff. And then Pliny is obviously good for your cleans. And then you can get some crunch and stuff out of it. And they've got more on the horizon, including one of my most anticipated, the Fortin Nameless, which is coming in the next update at the end of November. And if you're watching this in the future, it's probably already launched and probably like, well, there's other plugins coming. But that's one of my most anticipated. And it's exciting to see Neural's finally fulfilling these promises, even if the journey was a bit rocky. That being said, the pace of updates is still a contentious topic. A lot of people feel that they aren't updating as much as they could be, especially because a few months ago they debuted this thing called Tina. I can't remember what it stands for, but it was this robotic arm thing that apparently speeds up amp modeling, where they will take an amp and obviously turn the dials to create all the different combinations when they model it. It's an amp modeling robot. And basically the selling point was it would result in faster, more accurate amp models. And there were some high hopes around this because they made a big deal about it. And people thought it would lead to the rollout of new models. And I guess we haven't seen the acceleration that was kind of marketed at us and many were expecting. It's a reminder that while devices like this in their infancy and kind of in development phase are exciting, patience is a part of the game with the Quad Cortex. Not to say that there's anything really missing, because I think the device is perfect the way it is. I think Neural still has some work around balancing the marketing, the hype, and the actual delivery part. During these bumps, looking back to these 3 years, I still see the Quad Cortex as an essential part of my setup. It's been powerful and inspiring. I'm still excited to use it. I pick up my guitar and I don't feel limited by power constraints or issues. And Neural DSP has shown they're committed to making things right. So I think the future is very bright for the Quad Cortex, and I feel optimistic. And a lot of these issues around the updates and the communication and that, they're going to be footnotes eventually when this device reaches this level of maturity where every future update just feels like the icing on the top of the cake. Now let's talk about the money side of things. The cost of the Quad Cortex. So obviously I only have Australian prices to compare to, and it's different depending on where you're from in the world. But in Australia, the price tag of the Quad Cortex sits at around $3K, which is, I don't know, converted to American, a little over $2K, maybe $2,200, $2,300, whatever. And I think when you've got other options there, it's like, that sounds like a lot of money in this competitive landscape. But when you compare it to other top tier modelers on the market, it paints an interesting picture. Take for instance the Fractal FM9, which is one of the, I guess, closest competitors to the Quad Cortex. It's a fantastic unit. It comes with all the the fractal kitchen sink effects and whatnot. But you're looking in Australia at around $3,600 to buy that. And then, of course, it doesn't really kind of have it doesn't have the UI polish and whatnot of the Quad Cortex, but the sound quality, of course, is fantastic. If you're committed to having the latest and greatest from Fractal, it's obviously a worthy investment, no doubt, but it does come at a premium. It's a lot more than the Quad Cortex. Then on the budget end of the spectrum, you've got the Line 6 Helix, which in Australia comes in at around about $2,500. So I don't know, in American, maybe $1,700 or so. But however, given its age and the fact that things have kind of gone forward with, capturing and all that kind of amp modeling and stuff like that, I would probably hesitate to buy the Helix in 2024. And don't get me wrong, not to say it's bad or outdated. It's still a solid piece of gear, but in terms of future-proofing a setup, you might want to look elsewhere unless you're getting a really good deal. They're still updating the Helix and whatnot, but I just think the Quad Cortex right now is just better value for money in 2024 with kind of, now they're shipping on, all the promises that they promised at launch. And then you have the IK Multimedia Tonex pedal, which is a bit of a wild card because it's priced at under $800 in Australia. So what, I don't know, 500 US. It's an attractive option if you haven't got much money, because I realize not all of us can afford premium equipment like the Quad Cortex. It's a bit of a luxury to own something like this. However, it's still less featured compared to the Quad Cortex. It's got fewer bells and whistles overall, but it's got capturing and whatnot if that's important to you. It's more of a specialized tool in a way that might be perfect for some setups. And you watch some of the videos, they're still updating it. The effects and whatnot, the amp models sound really good, but in the comparisons between the Quad Cortex and whatnot, I can always hear when it's revealed that the Tonex still lacks some of the flourish and nuance that you kind of get, from the Quad Cortex or a fractal unit. In the realm of digital modelers, it's crucial to weigh both, your current needs and your future aspirations. Are you after every conceivable feature, or do you value the playing experience and the ease of use? The Quad Cortex kind of gives you a bit of everything in that regard. The cutting edge UI, the ease of use, the decent, slow measured updates. It makes the 3K price point feel justified given what you get on here. It's like buying a tablet versus a MacBook Pro. Obviously, the MacBook Pro and the tablet have overlap in that you can do certain things, but if you want more power and options, the Quad Cortex just kind of brings more to the table. For me, the investment has proven worthwhile over the past 3 years, and I don't regret it. And I'd wager that many others would find the same if owned the unit longer than a year. While price is a critical factor, the value of your gear ultimately comes down to how much it inspires and answers your musical journey, right? With the Quad Cortex, you're getting a long-term partner in that process that's designed to evolve with you, and neural, of course, updating and evolving as we go on. Now let's talk about one of the Quad Cortex's most touted features is the capture functionality. For many, this capability is it's a defining reason to choose Quad Cortex over other modelers, as it allows you to capture, real-world equipment and recreate them perfectly. The idea is, simple yet powerful. You have an amp or some boutique gear that you love. You can capture its unique tonal characteristics and save them in the Quad Cortex and share them with others if you want. And there are also captures available on the cloud which you can download, and companies that are selling specialized captures of really expensive equipment that most of us probably would never be able to get a hands on or afford, which broadens the options further. But here's the ironic twist. I'm a digital amp modeler guy. I've been in the amp modeling ecosystems all the way since like the Kidney Bean Line 6 devices. And I don't actually own any analog equipment to capture myself. So despite the capture functionality being a major selling point, it's not something that I've actually utilized myself. I'm kind of romanticized about going and borrowing some really boutique equipment and capturing it just to experience it. But yeah, this hasn't stopped me from exploring captures from other people. And I can honestly say that every capture I've tried has been excellent, especially the paid ones from Tone Junkie and whatnot. The sounds that you probably would never be able to get your hands on for the majority of people, primarily for rarity and cost reasons. But for those people who do have gear to capture, the ability to preserve that sound is, it's undoubtedly empowering. But yeah, ironically, I have not used the capture feature at all. And I realize that's one of the big reasons for people to get it. Whether or not you intend to use it personally, knowing this feature exists makes the Quad Cortex more versatile and appealing. If you consider in future how your needs might evolve, you might find an awesome pedal and want it on the Quad Cortex, or by chance you may get an experience to use an awesome amp and you want it on the Quad Cortex. That feature's there if you need it. Now, I want to dive into some of the practical aspects of the Quad Cortex that I've experienced over the last 3 years. While it truly has been a reliable piece of gear, I don't really have many complaints about it. There have been a few quirks and challenges I'd like to highlight that might be essential for some people watching. Durability of them is amazing. The functionality of them is amazing, and how intuitive they are as a whole. The rotary stomps are pretty snug. They can be a bit of a tight squeeze, especially during a live performance when you're trying not to hit the wrong foot switch. If you're wearing boots or something like that, you have to be mindful of the fact that, I've done it a few times. You might accidentally hit an incorrect foot switch. It's just part of the game, unfortunately, because of the placement. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to be mindful of, because if you've got high gain tone and then you've got a clean tone, you don't want to accidentally switch midway when you're chugging live and then you go to like a clean, delay preset or something like that. If you're not MIDI controlling this thing, practice your footwork first, because it's inevitable you're going to hit an extra stomp. Like, I still do it now after all these years, and I'm mindful of the fact that happens. But yeah, it's definitely something where it's a little bit snug. It's not a deal breaker. It's not a reason for me to want to switch away. But yeah, it definitely requires being in the back of your mind. Even though the overall stability of the Quad Cortex has been impressive, it's not immune to technical hiccups. I've encountered rare situations where the unit has rebooted itself or frozen, which is understandable given that it's essentially a computer. With a touchscreen, these things can happen. 100% of software isn't 100% reliable all the time. That's why you'll see, if you look at professional artists using the Quad Cortex in their rigs, they haven't just got one Quad Cortex, they've got 2 or 3 for redundancy, which is definitely a wise consideration if you can swing it. But I understand cost for many of us is an important factor, and many of us can't afford to have a harem of Quad Cortex devices all connected in a redundancy format. And I think especially when it comes to one of the crucial things is the boot time of the Quad Cortex is slow as hell. And they have improved it, but it's still slow. It feels like it takes around 2 minutes for a full reboot for this thing to be ready to use. And while the stability of the Quad Cortex is definitely a lot better in 2024 than it was in 2021, I thought it was good then, but there were issues that that Neural DSP sorted out in the Quad Cortex in updates. And I have no issues beyond the rare little issue, and I do mean rare, but don't assume that just because it's rare that it's not going to happen. And speaking of the boot time, let me tell you, during a live performance, 2 minutes can feel like a freaking eternity. If something goes awry, you're in the middle of a set, you don't have a backup, 2 minutes, especially if you're midway between a song, that would just be like a nightmare for a lot of guitarists. That's why, if you can, you should try and incorporate some strategies for redundancy. Obviously, Neural have released the Nano Cortex, which obviously just supports captures, but that could be a redundancy option if money is a consideration. But it's something to be aware of, that the boot time is slow. Now, another issue, another imperfect thing, not on the Quad Cortex itself, the software side, is the desktop app Cortex Control. The app, in my experience, it's still a bit of a buggy mess, regardless if you're on Windows or Mac. There's some issues there. It's still a little bit buggy. It's not as buggy as it was when it launched, but it crashes on me at least once every time I attempt to use it. When I'm doing a video for a tone video on YouTube, it's painful to have to edit out a crash. I don't usually leave those in, but yeah, it crashes on me at least once every open, which is a bit frustrating. Sometimes there's little things where it'll bug out. And I seriously hope that they're working on fixing these issues, because the app right now, it can be pretty frustrating to work with. But yeah, it's a small thing, I guess. I can use the Quad Cortex if I really want to have stable workflow. In terms of avoiding the lengthy boot time, just to kind of circle back to what I was talking about before, I usually leave the Quad Cortex in standby mode a lot of the time. You can just leave this thing standby mode, and I've done it so many times. I've left it on for days before over the last 3 years, and it hasn't reduced the longevity of the device at all. I have never had to get it repaired, but there's an issue, and I don't know if it's just a me problem, or if this is an issue with the drivers or whatever it is. But on Windows, there's this issue I run into. It's a memory leak or something. I don't know what it is. But if I leave it on for an extended period of time, the audio can glitch out, like completely unsalvageable audio. I can't tell you how many times. It's happened a few times now where I've recorded hours of video only to have to throw it out because the audio has stuffed up. And as a precaution these days, I now make a habit of shutting down or restarting the unit before I hit record, just to save myself the headache of potentially having to throw out hours of video that I worked hard on just because the driver's glitched out. And one thing to point out, while a lot of these challenges I'm talking about are real, they don't overshadow the immense benefits and enjoyment of the Quad Cortex. It doesn't make me want to sell it or ditch it. But understanding its quirks and preparing for the possibilities is just part of working with a modern computer-driven device like this. If anything, it's a testament to the importance of planning and preparation. Ensuring that no matter what you're using, if it's an AXFX 3 or a Helix or whatever, those have issues as well. I'm not saying those are perfect devices in comparison, because you'll see artists using those have redundancy as well. And they still have their own little caveats and bugs that are constantly being found and ironed out. So overall, the Quad Cortex is very stable. It's not, in 2024, you're probably not going to really encounter many issues. Speaking of which, one thing I really want to talk about, I know this video is getting pretty long, is an aspect I find that is often overlooked in a lot of the videos on the Quad Cortex, in the reviews and just the experiences, is the incredible community and support aspect. One of the standout elements of owning a Quad Cortex isn't just the unit itself, it's the community, it's the Discord, it's the forums, it's the users, it's Neural DSP as well, and their awesome customer support. Companies like Apple are notorious for charging more for their devices, but they're also notorious for having some of the best customer support out of all their competitors, which is what gives them the edge. And Neural DSP's customer service is top notch. You ask anyone in the community that has had to get in touch with customer support, they've been incredibly helpful. And when I've seen people run into issues, the team has been very prompt and effective in offering solutions. And what's even more impressive, I think, that a lot of people don't talk about as well, is the fact that if you buy a secondhand Quad Cortex device, you're kind of, like legally, especially in Australia, you're kind of waiving your rights to kind of getting access to kind of that customer support that you would get if you bought the unit directly through Neural DSP. And I've seen them honor warranty with used units where someone has bought it from Reverb or something like that. It's had issues, and Neural have fixed it free of charge under warranty, which I think is absolutely huge. That's a huge thing. That's something that a lot of companies could, within their rights, refuse to do. And I've seen people when they have, unfortunately, had issues with their Quad Cortex. I fortunately have not had any issues myself that have required it to be sent away to get repaired, touch wood. But I have noticed when people have, the turnaround time is really quick considering it's being sent to Europe. And beyond that official support, like I was saying, the community around the Quad Cortex is vibrant and supportive. If you're looking for help or inspiration or just a place to chat with fellow Quad Cortex owners, or even the plugins and stuff like that, I highly recommend the Discord because everyone in there is great. It's not an over-the-top sort of place where the mods have kind of ruined the vibe. It's alive, very active, people regularly chatting about the plugins and the Quad Cortex. It's very knowledgeable, and people are willing to share, the insights and setups around the Quad Cortex. The forums are also a great place as well, not as active, but if you have like a feature request or something like that, you can go onto the forums and make a request. There is information on there of things that people have asked going back the last few years of the release of the Quad Cortex. But I think the community aspect and the support aspect also add value to the Quad Cortex, and definitely, it's something not to be undersold. Let's also dive into another aspect. Is something contentious for me is the handling of presets and the lack of a conventional file format. If you come from a Line 6 device like a HD 500 or a Helix or a Fractal unit, you're probably accustomed to having direct control over the preset files. You can save them, you can back them up, copy them onto an SD card on your computer. It's a fairly straightforward process. The Quad Cortex, on the other hand, relies on cloud for preset management, so obviously internet connectivity, which Neural DSP has positioned as a feature. But for me, this walled garden approach has always been a little unsettling. It's not that the cloud system doesn't work. At the moment, it functions quite effectively and efficiently, but the inability to physically copy and back up presets locally remains a sticking point for me. And I know they have said that they don't want to do that, but I do hope they reconsider that in the future, because there is something to be said about having direct access to your files, especially if you're someone who likes to keep detailed backups or easily share, presets between devices, or you want this device in 20 years. If you get this at a garage sale or whatever, it'd be a relic by then. But being able to turn it on and be like, oh, well, they've shut the cloud down. Obviously, a huge what if, and a lot of people aren't keeping equipment this long, but it does kind of stay in the back of my mind that you wouldn't be able to do that. Clearly, this isn't a deal breaker for most users, and it certainly wasn't enough of an issue to deter me from investing in the Quad Cortex, but it is always in the back of my mind, especially how ingrained the whole practice of a file format is with other devices in the industry, and I hope other devices keep that and Neural eventually kind of reconsiders, or on a future device reconsiders. I think it becomes increasingly frustrating, this lack of file format, when you think of the lack of the realized marketplace. Neural DSP has promised a marketplace for ages, and it hasn't materialized yet. So this means if you want to sell presets or captures, or you want to buy them, you're stuck in this convoluted process that involves befriending them on Cortex Cloud. They have to befriend you as well for it to be a two-way relationship. And then you can share private paid content with them, or they can share it with you. And I sell presets as well, and it's cumbersome to say the least. It's not conducive to a seamless user experience. It kind of goes against the whole simplicity aspect of the Quad Cortex. And I realize for most people, they're not buying presets and captures or selling them, but I think it definitely underserves a segment of the ecosystem that other modelers have, and it means that people can't start their own storefronts and stuff as easily because it's very cumbersome. Yeah, it's not a deal breaker, as I say, but it is a bit of a contentious thing. But overall, there you have it. That's 3 years of living with the Quad Cortex. I'm being a little bit picky in some of my feedback, especially around the file format. But it's been quite a journey, and some mostly good. A few little challenges, but mostly good stuff. And if you're considering getting a Quad Cortex, I hope the things I've talked about have helped you make an informed decision. Obviously, at the end of the day, would I buy it again? Would I buy another Quad Cortex? Absolutely. I wouldn't even hesitate. It's a great device. I would argue that in 2024, it's a lot better than it was in 2021. And I remember I was smitten with the Quad Cortex in 2021. So it's a great time to buy it now. It's in a really good place. The plugin compatibility is rolling out. We're going to have 4 plugins compatible soon. And obviously getting more effects and amp models and stuff. But overall, don't even hesitate. Just, if you're on the fence about it, there's not really any valid argument I could think of that would say, no, don't buy this device, other than the fact you can't afford it, obviously. If money's an issue, I'm not advocating to go get a credit card or a loan to buy it, or steal or anything like that. But maybe if you have some analog equipment and you want a Quad Cortex, maybe you want to make the leap, you could sell some of it and move in. Because if you watch all the comparison videos and stuff like that, you can hear the sound quality is indistinguishable from a lot of the real things, especially in a mix at the end of the day. You're hearing a lot of amps and stuff in a mix, indistinguishable. So yeah, reliable, dependable, and a worthy investment that I think is going to be a worthy investment for years to come. I hope that was helpful, and I would love to hear your Quad Cortex stories as well if you want to drop them in the comments. If you've owned it for a while, are there things that I didn't touch upon that are important to you? The reason that you bought it beyond, seeing a playthrough and the sound quality? Have you run into issues that I haven't run into? in the comments. Let me know. But until next time, we're going to end this video here because it's been going along. So thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.